up in North Philly, survive the streets, and gain respect as a rapper, you need more than tough skin. You need Kevlar, raw talent, and a dream. Success is one of the few ways to make the cost of that armor worth the reward.
You could survive in North Philly, but it made you a certain kind of person.
For Philly rap legend Meek Mill, determination set his path toward a dream he refused to wake up from, despite the nightmares along the way.
Meek Mill is more than a rapper. He's a movement.
He's a living legend in the hip-hop community and in Philly.
In 2007, Meek's Philly fairy tale took a dark turn and ignited an antagonistic origin story that would change his life forever.
Meek is living proof of the old adage that you only make diamonds when you apply pressure.
We're seeing those hidden dark aspects of the court system that a lot of people didn't know before this case was even announced.
A political movement born from the ashes of a fiery battle between a rapper with dreams of fame and fortune and a judge determined to stand in his way.
Judge Brinkley cracked down, determined to keep him all the way in check.
This is the journey of Meek Mill, a journey through the shadows of injustice and the quest for redemption.
The late 80s and 90s in the city of brotherly love was all about the come-up. Celebrities like Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff were making a name for themselves and putting Philly on the map. As the city showed its jewels by way of talent and opportunity, North Philly was still a diamond in the rough.
I grew up in North Philadelphia. My neighborhood, like every part of North Philadelphia, was filled with lots of things. There was love and there was community, there was joy, but there was also a lot of violence. There was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of drug addiction. There were crumbling schools.
And during that tough time, one of the biggest rappers of the 21st century would be born in that tough place.
Robert Rameek Williams was born in Philadelphia in 1987. His mom, her name was Kathy Williams. Meek Mill's father, Robert Parker, was killed in 1992 attempting a robbery, and Meek was only 5 years old.
With his father gone, Meek would learn difficult lessons while finding his way as a brother, a son, and the man of the house. He frequently recalls this shift in his life, vocalizing that at a very early age, he developed a sense of responsibility and the urgency to conquer the obstacles facing his mother, his older sister, Nashima, and himself.
Because he lost his father, much of the upbringing, much of the community, much of the protection that he received came from his neighborhood. It came from brothers on the corner. It came from old heads up the block. It came from people who may have wanted him to be okay, but also were engaged in some activities that were a bad influence on him.
5 years old is a really, really early age to activate your survival mode.
Meek Mill grew up surrounded by hard times and hard consequences, a hood teetering with crime and cops.
Being from North Philly, Meek Mill knew what it meant to grow up around poverty. He knew what it meant to grow up in households that didn't have fathers. He understood what it meant to have to be a survivor from day one.
At this time, North Philly was becoming a center for drugs, violence, robbery, and homicide. For Meek, it may have been difficult to be a child trying to do the right thing.
Despite the hardships of growing up in the projects, Robert Rameek Williams had a passion that kept him focused on a future beyond the world around him: rap.
Coming up in North Philly, everybody wanted to be a rapper. So you spend a lot of time having lunchroom battle raps. You spend a lot of time on the block sharpening your skills.
Some people didn't even know that Meek was a battle rapper. I mean, that's how he started. In Philly, guys would just be on the block and then you would just spit without no beat and just go against one another. And it's real loud, spit going flying everywhere, people standing right around you. That's the purest form of hip hop, is when it's mano y mano, it's me against you. And you know, Meek did it really well.
You see that artistry and you see that talent and you see that tenacity in Meek Mill's raps.
Even the most promising and talented individuals could find themselves influenced by the mischief of the Philadelphia streets. The smorgasbord of temptation left something for everyone, and trouble wasn't hard to find.
Meek was a quiet and focused kid. and was friends with drug dealers growing up, and he lost a lot of friends to the streets.
At 14 years old, Robert Williams knew he had what it took to throw down with the best of the best.
He started making a lot of noise, doing collabs with people. He started making a name for himself real young in hip-hop.
Meek joined a group called the Bloodhounds in 2001, which was one of the hottest up-and-coming rap groups in the city.
Meek wanted it bad. His hustle, his work ethic. You know, he watched his mom. He watched his mom being a hustle, and that's what motivated him. That's what gave him the drive, and, you know, he hasn't stopped since.
Success found Meek Mill, whose years of hustling finally paid off in the following years. Eventually, Meek Mill would go on to become one of the biggest rappers in the world, winning awards, topping charts, and garnering fame and notoriety.
Meek Mill rose from battle rapping on local streets to a hometown hero, pouring cash into the city's schools and bailing out 20 women for the holidays.
Riding the high of charity in 2017, he released his third studio album, Wins and Losses.
On August 16, 2017, Meek Mill is on The Tonight Show, a big moment for anybody's career.
But little did Meek Mill know that after his performance promoting Wins and Losses, he would quickly go from the win of a televised performance to an immediate and dramatic loss.
He's in Upper Manhattan, and there's a videotape that emerges of him popping a wheelie on a dirt bike.
The amount of police presence for arresting Meek Mill after popping a wheelie appeared to be very excessive and unusual.
When I heard about the arrest when he violated his probation for popping the wheelie, that just blew me away. I mean, I've been a victim of bullshit arrests. I've been a victim of petty arrests by police. That has to be one of the most pettiest. Popping a wheelie, I ride bikes, and I've popped many wheelies. And I've been arrested for a few things, but I've never, ever been arrested for that.
Meek's rapid success was in danger, all from mischief in the streets on a four-wheeler. Jail time was facing the rap battle legend, and with 2 to 4 years hanging over his head, Meek, along with the rest of the media, beg an answer to one singular question. What is going on here? After a lifetime of grinding, committing his craft and fighting his way into the spotlight, Meek Mill is on top of the world. That is, until a seemingly inconsequential arrest uncovers a decade of legal woes. From rap battles to court battles, Meek's fight appeared to be far from over. A rising young star, only 30 years old, finds himself sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison following an arrest for popping a wheelie. The media erupts into a confused frenzy. A superstar rapper facing hard time for doing a trick on a dirt bike?
Meek went from promoting his album on late night TV to immediately facing 2 to 4 years in prison for felony charges and probation violations.
When Meek Mill walked into that Philadelphia courtroom in 2017, Judge Janice Brinkley made headlines by sending him back to prison for popping illegal wheelies while on probation.
On that day, Meek Mill got in more trouble for a dirt bike than maybe anybody in American history.
But to trace the line from popping a wheelie to 4 years in prison, you must first follow the thread all the way back to the very beginning.
His legal saga began in 2007 with a dramatic arrest on drug and weapon charges during an alleged undercover deal in Southwest Philly.
Growing up in North Philly, where Meek Mill grew up, it's definitely not difficult to find yourself in a negative encounter with a law enforcement officer.
But when Meek opened the door to leave his cousin's apartment in January 2007, he was met with more than just the Philly streets on the other side.
So in January of 2007, Meek Mill is walking down the street, going to the corner store, he says. At this point, the police arrest him.
Reportedly, he was beaten and arrested by an entire entourage of police officers.
I mean, it was police brutality, plain and simple. He was a teenager, he was bloody, black eye. He even had some of his braids ripped out.
And Meek says that they use his head as a battering ram to open a door.
Once inside, police searched for evidence, throwing the apartment and Meek's life into chaos.
They were looking for evidence to tie him to a crime that they allegedly witnessed, and they didn't care what they had to do to make them right.
The evidence was recovered. The suspects were arrested, but the question remained, what was the crime?
Officer Reggie Graham was one of the primary officers and the key and only witness ever brought to court against Meek Mill.
On January 23, 2007, Philadelphia Field Narcotics Police Officer Reggie Graham says that he saw Meek Mill sell crack to a confidential informant. The next day, Meek is arrested and brought in on drug charges.
Cracking down on drug activity was a constant priority. So, when an officer insists your involvement, it's taken seriously. Innocent until proven guilty becomes a blurred line. And for Meek's encounter, this was more than a suspected drug arrest.
Reggie Graham had said that when they went to make an arrest, that Meek Mill had ran from him, and while they was chasing him, Meek had actually pulled out a gun and started threatening.
Now, according to Meek, he'd already ditched the gun and he wasn't carrying a gun when he was apprehended.
Under these circumstances, he didn't stand a chance.
Following his arrest by over 20 police officers, Meek Mill was put on trial in front of Judge Janice Brinkley.
On August 19, 2008, Meek Mill for the first time enters Judge Janice Brinkley's courtroom, and he's facing drug charges and gun charges.
The judge in this case had already had a bad reputation in the Philly court system. She was known for being cold, calculated, and unreasonable.
Judge Janice Brinkley was most known for her relentless pursuit of probation violations in her cases.
The trial began and Meek found himself up against the entire system, standing on his own.
In court, Officer Graham took the stand and told the judge that he witnessed the alleged drug deals firsthand from his cruiser, and he saw Meek Mill run from the police and point a gun at them. Typically, if an officer takes a stand and says that a gun was pointed at him or her by a defendant, that is going to definitely hold weight.
Graham's testimony would end up being the killing blow for the case against Meek Mill.
Now, in most cases, a weapons charge like Meek's would result in house arrest and a fine. But on this day, in Judge Brinkley's courtroom, he received a 22-month sentence in the county jail and 8 years of probation.
Meek was found guilty on 7 of the 19 charges brought against him. 4 of those charges pertain to possession of a firearm and aiming at an officer.
What was quite interesting about the Meek Mill situation was that the sentence was less than the time he was on probation, which caused into serious question whether or not this judge was actually following the law.
Meek Mill's musical prowess earned his status as one of hip-hop's elite.
Meek was sent to the big house to carry out the sentence on a crime he claims he didn't commit.
Now, at the same time that Meek is in the middle of legal woes, his music career is starting to take off. Just a few days after that sentence, Flamers comes out, and it's the hottest mixtape on the streets.
Meek's career took off at a sprint, and in 2012, he took the world outside of Philly by storm with the release of his debut album, Dreams and Nightmares.
Dreams and Nightmares. Oh my God, I remember that. That's my guy.
However, the celebration period for Dreams and Nightmares was short-lived. The day after the album's release, Meek's festivities turned quickly from a dream into an all-too-familiar nightmare.
The day after Meek Mill's album drops, October 31st, he's in legal trouble again.
Police executed a routine pullover because of Meek Mill's dark window tint. Police asked to search his car for suspected marijuana, but Meek refused to let them do so.
And all it took was one small violation, a shade of window tint, a smidge too dark, to rope Meek Mill back into the endless, vicious grip of the legal system and of Janice Brinkley.
Now, because of the legal issue with the tinted windows and the weed in the car, he has a probation violation. So now Meek Mill has to go back to Judge Brinkley's courtroom.
Judge Brinkley charged Meek with violating his probation and ordered 2 drug tests. Both came back clean. She still decided to restrict his travel.
But seeing his career threatened, Meek tries desperately to keep the momentum of his debut going.
What do you do if you're a rapper who has an album out, who can't travel to do shows when that's the primary way you make money? Well, you either stay in your city and lose all your money, or you risk probation violations by traveling.
When Judge Brinkley found out that Meek had booked concerts, she was livid. She put Meek on house arrest to the end of the year, knowing how much that would set him back.
And this is where I believe the back and forth between him and the judge really began. That game will go on for a long, long time.
What started as a simple arrest for a run-of-the-mill suspected drug deal turns into a lifelong feud between a young rapper trying to get his shot at fame and a judge who's in a white-hot pursuit of justice. But when the two forces collide, who will... This was him doing whatever he had to do in order to achieve his dreams, and achieve them he did. But for Meek Mill, there's no amount of success or fame that could lift him high enough to be out of Brinkley's reach.
Meek Mill was reprimanded for writing social media posts about his probation officer, which caused fans to send death threats to the officer. Judge Brinkley also accused him of being combative and disrespectful to prosecutors and court officials.
She even mandated etiquette classes for various probation violations, including drug use and alleged offenses against justice system officials.
The fact that etiquette classes was given to Meek Mill, it leaves you questioning what, if any, reasoning was behind this.
At this point, it looks to many people like they're simply trying to humiliate and shame Meek in public.
Not one to take no for an answer, Meek continues to put 100% into the grind, working at his craft and trying to perform for his fans, trying being the key word.
The one consistent thing was his traveling privileges were being revoked by Brinkley because he wasn't reporting back to the court.
July 13, 2014, Meek Mill performs a concert out of the city. The judge finds out and orders him to spend time in jail for probation violations.
Every time Meek seemed poised for greatness, the judge held him back, hindering his path to stardom.
With every step forward in his career, Meek found himself hand in hand with the courts, his consequences growing larger and larger as the length of his probation stretched across years.
In February 2016, Meek Mill attended a 4.5-hour hearing where he made a passionate testimonial, arguing for leniency and grace from the courts. There were hours of pleas on Meek's behalf, but the judge was unmoved.
He'd be forced to wear an ankle monitor, participate in community service, and was prohibited from working and traveling outside of Philly.
Despite being court-ordered to either be at home or at the homeless shelter for his community service, Meek still finds himself fighting to overcome the hurdle of Judge Brinkley's impossible standards.
The judge accused Meek Mill of not fulfilling his community service, even though Meek Mill had been at the shelter doing his community work.
According to Brinkley, she made a surprise visit to the homeless shelter that Meek was ordered to do his community service. When she got there, she sat at a table to blend in and observe. And she was astounded by what she saw.
He was helping bagging up clothing donations for the homeless, but Judge Brinkley wanted him to serve food, so because of that, she held him in violation. I mean, it was low-key harassment.
Now, all of a sudden, we're asking why she's showing up to community service.
Judge Brinkley's appearing at community service is odd. It appears that there was an overstepping of judicial authority.
In early 2017, a decade after his probation began, Meek finds himself in the headlines yet again. But this time, it's at the center of an airport brawl.
Meek Mill sparks chaos in my hometown, St. Louis, at the airport in 2017 after a scuffle erupts when he refuses a fan's photo request, leading to a misdemeanor assault charge while still on probation.
Once again, Judge Brinkley held him in violation.
In November 2017, we end up right back where we began, New York City, where Meek Mill is arrested after a video of him popping a wheelie on a dirt bike is posted on social media.
Despite continuous legal woes, Meek drops his album, Wins and Losses, in 2017 and hits the Tonight Show stage, but gets nabbed for reckless motorbike driving antics in New York, igniting a fresh legal battle captured on social media.
Because of the arrest for the dirt bike, Judge Brinkley once again said, Meek, you can't travel because you have another probation violation.
The assistant DA and Meek's own probation officer advocated on Meek's behalf.
Judge Brinkley delivers her ruling on Meek over his driving stunt. But little does she know, There's a storm brewing over the Pennsylvania courthouse, and the clouds are preparing to part.
Judge Brinkley delivers a crushing blow, sentencing Meek to 2 to 4 years in state prison for violating probation.
The verdict felt incredibly harsh to the public, especially when considering that all sides were pushing against jail time for this violation.
The fact that Meek Mills suffered so many probation violations was a concern for the judge. However, the question becomes who actually violated him. It doesn't make any sense that he suffered all of these violations and it continued over the amount of time that it did.
With Meek potentially heading to prison and the public now pulling their magnifying glasses onto the entire court, has Judge Janice Brinkley finally flown too close to the sun? But will she... With Meek Mill in handcuffs, Judge Janice Brinkley watches with her gavel clutched tight. But with the world now looking in on her courtroom, will she be able to keep her hold on Meek's future like she has for the last 10 years? Or will she be exposed as a judge holding a petty grudge?
There's an immediate rallying around Meek after his sentencing is announced from fans and colleagues alike.
I believe this was the start of an entire social justice movement.
For the first time, people who never paid attention to the injustices of our probation system were now paying attention. And that would not change. In fact, it has started an unrelenting, uncompromising movement to reform probation and parole around the country.
Mobilized by famous friends and supporters of Meek, a revolution begins.
What's important to understand is that this system is actually controlled and run by its citizens, the general public. And once the general public loses confidence in the system, there's going to be a movement for social change.
Since I was a teenager, I've been fighting for change in the criminal justice system. But I became especially interested in the case of Meek because I knew him. We're from the same neighborhood, we're from the same city, and I was inspired by his talent and his genius.
As Meek is hauled off to prison, his fellow rappers, including Jay-Z, Rick Ross, they all rally behind him, offering words of encouragement, marking the beginning of a high-profile battle for justice.
Billboards and buses sprung up seemingly overnight, calling to free Meek Mill and demanding justice.
On November 14, 2017, hashtag Free Meek Mill buses swarmed Philly's police headquarters, followed by a massive protest involving celebrity backing and support from stars like Julius, Dr. J. Irving, rapper Rick Ross, as billboards demanding Meek's release spring up all across the city.
He had the support of big names and the culture was behind him. People knew who he was, so it was like all hands on deck.
In the public's eye, the demand to free Meek Mill became synonymous with the idea of reforming the justice system.
Even from the inside, Meek feels the support being given to him and is inspired toward change.
Through the course of his legal struggles, Meek Mill isn't just a victim of the system. He becomes a passionate and prominent voice of potential reform of that very system.
Despite incarceration, Meek joins a criminal justice reform panel on March 13th, declaring himself a voice for the voiceless and amplifying the call for change.
The public is in full support of a free Meek Mill and reformed prison and probation systems. But the major problem, Meek is still in prison. Enter private investigating firm QRI.
QRI is a private investigation firm founded by Luke, Brendel Kim, and Tyler Marani. QRI was brought in to help overturn Meek's conviction and get him out of prison.
The law is set up where wrongs that have been done are always open to be overturned. The question is, who can do it and how do they do it? It starts off by finding new evidence.
To do that, they had to start at the very beginning, Meek's 2007 arrest.
Luke and Tyler started at the very beginning with the thing that started it all, the alleged drug deal that Officer Reggie Graham said he saw Meek perpetrate.
According to the original police report, Reggie Graham was parked in his police cruiser. That's when he saw a 19-year-old Meek Mill walk to a street corner and engage in drug activity. So Tyler and Luke parked their car exactly where the cruiser was in their report. And they realized something. It was impossible to see the apartment in the corner from that position.
Given the evidence presented, the defense claimed there was no way Reggie Graham could have seen Meek Mills exit the apartment, engage in the drug deal, and then walk back home, like his official testimony states.
And then the investigation turns to the other officers that accompanied Graham on the day Meek was arrested.
There were 19 officers listed on the original documents as witnesses and participants in the arrest of Meek Mill. But Luke and Tyler discovered that there were more officers there. Why would they leave any of the arresting officer off the police reports?
Meek's team tracked down one of the alleged missing officers who claimed Meek didn't in fact resist arrest or pull out a gun. Other officers corroborated this story as well.
It's a question of, can we trust police officers? Can we trust judges? I mean, are we really to believe that Meek Mill pulled a gun out as a black man in North Philadelphia on police officers and somehow didn't get shot and was arrested without incident? That seems almost impossible.
With the evidence piling up against Reggie Graham, the boys from QRI were beginning to prepare their cases when a final, crucial piece of evidence went public.
Reggie Graham was listed in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Do Not Call list, including current and former police officers barred from testifying due to misconduct.
Underneath his name, the list stated that Graham was being investigated by federal authorities for several acts of corruption and had retired before his scheduled hearing. Strike number 3.
Reggie Graham had fallen into an investigation for misconduct and hastily retired before his hearing, leaving an opening for QRI to blow the case against Meek Mill wide open.
This meant that the prosecution's one and only witness had proven to be unreliable. The moment that the court senses, sees, or is given information that the credibility of a police officer or court officer has been damaged, then there is no going back.
All of it looks suspicious. And the fact that it looks suspicious in Meek's case makes America, and anyone watching this in particular, realize that it ain't just about Meek. That every single person who goes into that courtroom is subjected to the possibility of bias, the possibility of inequality, the possibility that they won't get a fair shake.
Armed with the evidence from the QRI investigation, Meek Mill's legal team presents the findings to the Philadelphia Court of Appeals, hoping to gain freedom for Meek.
Meek releases his pinnacle single and anthem of defiance, Dreams and Nightmares, in February 2018. The rap song becomes a rallying cry for justice as it echoes through the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl victory, symbolizing resilience in the face of injustice.
Like black people have done throughout history, Meek Mill transformed his pain into power. Although he took many losses with the criminal justice system, he managed to catapult himself into a leadership role in the reform movement.
With the evidence and the public rallied behind him, Meek Mill waits on bated breath as his future is decided within the Court of Appeals. But as a binder of evidence and a trending social justice movement, while the public was protesting and petitioning for Meek's freedom, a team of private investigators were preparing evidence. Meek Mill sits in a jail cell, waiting for the Philadelphia court system to decide his fate. And then, they do.
After months of legal battles, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court orders Meek Mill's early release from prison, overturning his controversial 2 to 4 year sentence for probation violation.
I think a high-profile case like Meek Mill's case keeps law enforcement and the criminal justice system on their toes. They know that all eyes are on them, so they have to make sure that investigation is done right.
Meek's life is a story of racial injustice, economic inequality, corrupt systems. But like many people who face those systems, he pushed back, he resisted, he struggled, and he ultimately emerged victorious.
With protests and demonstrations filling the streets and surrounding courthouses, billboards lining the roads, and celebrities leading the charge, The hashtag Free Meek Mill movement captured the nation's attention.
Throughout the trial, a sea of voices echoed throughout the streets of Philly as hundreds rallied behind Meek Mill. They all was chanting, "Free Meek Mill," and demanding an end to systemic injustice. Each protest significantly helped steer Meek in the direction of freedom.
After 10 years of being pulled in and out of house arrests, hearings, prisons, people were finally listening. Meek's story finally made the people realize the problems that have been plaguing our probation system for years.
He has turned himself into a leader, not just for his city, but for the entire country, advocating for an entire overhaul of a broken system.
For a decade, it was Meek Mill versus the entire justice system. And in the blink of an eye, the tides of the battle turned, and Meek found himself surrounded by support.
The previous Pennsylvania governor, Tom Wolf, pardoned Meek of his original arrest, freeing him completely.
In December 2023, the new Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro, signed reforms to Pennsylvania's probation system, limiting when a person serving probation can be sent off to prison for technical violations.
When Governor Josh Shapiro introduces a major probation reform bill in the state of Pennsylvania, who's standing next to him? Meek Mill. And Meek wasn't just a bystander in that conversation. He spoke at the podium. He talked about his experience, and he talked about the fight to get this bill passed. That day, that moment is proof that we can change society and that people can change their lives.
Meek's case was overturned because of public awareness, because of public advocacy, and because of the public sentiment that this was a wrong and a miscarriage of justice.
Meek Mill's activism is centered around prison and probation reform, working hard to prevent other people from being preyed upon in the same way he was.
Meek Mill co-founded the Reform Alliance alongside Jay-Z and the New England Patriots owner, Robert Kraft.
Meek is a trailblazer in criminal justice reform, penning a New York Times op-ed and co-founding the Reform Alliance, aiming to change laws and free 1 million people.
With his own legal battles behind him, Meek is able to put his focus back behind his real passion, his music.
In November 2018, Meek Mill put out his 4th studio album, Championships. It was met with critical and commercial acclaim.
Despite legal battles, Meek Mill's musical prowess earned him a Grammy nomination in 2020, solidifying his status as one of hip-hop's elite with an estimated net worth of $20 million.
You know, Meek is a young guy from Philly who has a gift of words and lyrics. People just was happy to see him doing what God put him on this earth to do.
By the time the 2020s rolled around, it really did seem like Meek Mill was getting the last laugh.
As of 2023, Judge Brinkley, under fire for her handling of Mill's case, is reassigned amid disputes over criminal justice reform, facing allegations of discrimination and retaliation as her re-election looms.
After Meek Mill's case, the judicial leadership started looking into several of Judge Janice Brinkley's cases. They found a paper trail of seemingly illegal sentences.
After a failed re-election bid, Judge Janice Brinkley found herself cast out of her own courtroom, all at the hands of the public that rallied behind Meek Mill and against her.
Brinkley stirs debate, with her lawyer likening her situation to having her hands tied behind her back and duct tape on her mouth.
People saw that a judge went well beyond the authority and decency of fair and impartiality of this particular individual. And when they saw it, with the help of many people, they rose up, and it did change our system in Philadelphia and perhaps beyond.
Meek kept receiving backlash from the court system. When Meek scheduled new concerts against her orders, she placed him on a 90-day house arrest, effectively halting his career momentum.
Meek Mill has been extraordinarily successful despite all of his legal challenges. But the fact remains, he is still hampered by his past. He still is limited by his felony convictions. He still has had losses financially and reputationally that he can never recover from.
Finally, Meek's battle with Judge Brinkley was over, and Meek Mill didn't hesitate to make up for lost time. With all the support he received through his battle, he grew dedicated to paying it forward and invoking change. Nothing could be taken for granted, and the sky was the limit for Meek, his music, and his mission. A life put on hold at the hand of a corrupt judicial system, a voice that refused to be silenced, a talented artist born to be a legend. Meek Mill persevered against a system that was working overtime to ensure that he failed, and a judge who found herself standing in his way. Long after the record stopped spinning, the impact of the work done by Meek Mill will be felt by those seeking justice from the justice system itself. Through the dreams and the nightmares, Meek Mill turned his pain into purpose.
In Shreveport, Louisiana, a gruesome and perplexing mystery unfolds.
You got blood in the car, you got a missing person, but you got no body.
So what's the story?
A rookie detective takes out one of the most personal cases of his career.
What are those?
I know what it is, because I was in the Navy.
Get this thing tested.
A desperate search for answers.
No more games.
Everyone had a story to tell, but no one was telling the truth.
Leads to an unsettling revelation.
It's in the woods.
He's telling me where the body's dumped.
In a showdown with the prime suspect.
Music.
And innovation, nestled in the heart of downtown Manhattan, where industry icons and artists alike boast of its prestige.
The rising hip-hop star entered Quad Studios with his entourage, ready to lay down some tracks for a new project. Quad Studios was a pretty active studio, and everyone who was anyone recorded there. The atmosphere at Quad Studios was typical of a busy recording session. However, there was an underlying tension due to the power dynamics within the hip-hop community.
Yet the bigger the artists that donned the doors of the infamous studio, the steeper the competition that arose, causing egos to clash and tempers fueled with jealousy and envy to fester and eventually implode.
The incident at Quad Studios sparked a rap beef so severe, everyone was affected.
At that particular time, no one was safe. Period.
This shooting was really what started the East Coast, West Coast beef.
So much mystery, so many unanswered questions.
With the legendary studio now a crime scene, music and hip-hop fans around the world braced themselves for the birth of a bitter and brutal rivalry that not only left rapper Tupac Shakur shot, but also turned longtime friends into mortal enemies.
That single night would put Tupac Shakur at the forefront.
This story of betrayal, violence, and deep-seated wounds altered the course of hip-hop history.
With hip-hop becoming a dominant force on the airwaves across the nation, a storm was slowly beginning to brew amongst some of hip-hop's biggest artists. From regions ranging from the South to the Midwest, the East and West Coast, artists such as Scarface, Jay-Z, Outkast, Snoop Dogg, the Notorious B.I.G. were setting a standard for bridging the gap between the reality of life on the street and that of one in the studio. But when lines are blurred, potential beefs are bound to erupt.
In the early 90s, the hip-hop scene was vibrant but super competitive, with tensions between the East Coast and West Coast.
At the center of attention was an artist and budding superstar that proved to reign supreme on both the East and West Coasts.
Tupac was something of a messiah, a musical messiah.
Tupac was an actor, an artist, an activist, a role model, and a sex symbol.
Most people liked him, liked his message, his charisma.
Although Tupac's talent was unmatched, and he was liked from coast to coast, it was Tupac's mind, his vision, and his ability to do a multitude of things that set the young Tupac Amaru Shakur apart.
When he walked in a room and just lit up, he definitely had a presence. people was drawn to him.
When you're raised as a child of the Black Panther Party and raised in a very politically charged environment, you may have the idea that people are against you or that you have to fight the power.
My mother was in the Black Panthers.
She was in jail when she was pregnant with me.
Born June 16, 1971, in the Harlem area of New York City, Tupac was son of Black Panther Party activist Afeni Shakur, who after Tupac's birth moved her family from New York to Baltimore, then ultimately to the Bay Area in 1988. Although Tupac had been pursuing the arts since he was a child, his love for music and lyrical gifts with rap took off when he, his mom, sister, and family established roots in the Bay.
In 1991, Pac was discovered by the rap group Digital Underground.
Growing up under that kind of influence, it had to play a role in how he viewed life. Some that are a bit more lighthearted, some that are about violence or drugs.
If that's the environment you grew up in, that's gonna be the people you surround yourself with. That's just the nature of the environment we grew up in.
After contributing and performing on 2 albums with Bay Area hit group Digital Underground, Tupac was ready to fly and release his solo album entitled Tupacalypse Now on both the East and West Coasts.
He had been in a lot of trouble, a lot of legal trouble. In 1993, Tupac was arrested for allegedly shooting a police officer. I was actually present when he was arrested and put in handcuffs.
Between 1993 through the fall of 1994, Tupac Shakur racked up accusations including assault, possession of a firearm, attempted murder, and sexual assault. And with the mounting cases stacking against him by November of 1994, the 23-year-old hip-hop superstar Tupac Shakur would face his greatest challenge yet.
I think a lot of his court cases only added to the persona of being an outlaw and being a rebel.
Jimmy Henchman, Haitian Jack, these were the individuals that was around Pac at that time. Once Pac caught the rape, I think that's where everything else transpired from.
The unresolved case added fuel to the incident to further their narratives of victimization and aggression. According to Tupac, it was him against the world. It was a narrative that started to hit a little too close to home.
While out on bail and awaiting trial for the sexual assault of Ayanna Jackson, Tupac Shakur decided to secure money to aid in the payment of his defense. However, when word on the street regarding his alleged rape friends, Lil C's, and of course the notorious B.I.G. himself.
On November 30th of 1994, Tupac went into Quad Studios in Manhattan to record verses for a project. He was invited by a fellow rapper and producer, unaware of the danger that awaited him.
Me and Big was involved in street activities before he got his record deal, so we were well aware of, people scheming and stuff of that, things of that nature. So he would tell Pac, like, yo, you gotta watch out for certain people that be around because dudes is grimy.
At that time, Quad Studios was a pretty active studio, and everyone who was anyone recorded there.
With rumors and retaliation at the forefront, and a potential guilty conviction of sexual assault lingering in the balance, Tupac sought refuge in doing the one thing he did best: make music. But what started as a safe place to write rhymes and rap turned into a hallway of hell that left a long-standing friendship severed and future award-winning rapper life shattered.
The betrayal that he thought was around him, it ran deep.
After standing trial for charges of sexual abuse, sodomy, and illegal possession of a firearm, rapper and actor Tupac Shakur was looking to make a few extra dollars to help with the growing legal costs he'd incurred from his ongoing trial. As the California-raised but New York-born Shakur stood trial in the Big Apple, Tupac received a call from his longtime friends, rapper James Lloyd, also known as Lil C's, and Christopher Wallace, aka the notorious B.I.G., regarding an opportunity to record a verse for an upcoming project at the infamous Quad Studios in downtown Manhattan.
Being the musical genius that Tupac was, I'm sure, if he got an invitation to go do music, he was gonna go do music. As long as the environment was cool, as a creative, it's hard to turn down an invitation to create.
Given the history of the recording artist that had dawned the doorways of Quad Studios before him, Tupac made sure that he wasn't the exception, but rather the recording rule. Yet, given Tupac's recent legal woes, Holla If You Hear Me artist had developed more than just a reputation of being a talented MC. Murmurs of the sexual assault allegations gave heavy hitters in the streets means, motives, and opportunity for possible retaliation.
Nobody ever said that nobody from the East Coast liked Pac. But you have people in the streets that's scheming.
The opinions was running rampant everywhere, and we basically didn't know what the truth was.
Tupac, however, did know the truth and maintained his innocence while aggressively fighting the sexual assault charges filed against him.
How am I gonna forcibly do anything to a girl after she did it to me consensually? And that's not something I'm making up. That's what they said. They said that. The girl came to court and said she did this, she did that, she called my hotel, it was good. She said that, not me. Now, why am I gonna force her?
With that, Tupac ignored the potential threats and November 30th arrived with a small crew to record his track and grab his much-needed fee for his efforts.
Tupac Shakur entered Quad Studios with his entourage. As Tupac and his team stepped into the lobby, they were ambushed by a group of armed men. The night was relatively uneventful until Tupac received an invitation to come record a verse. And before he could even make it onto the elevator, he was attacked. The attackers demanded money and jewelry, leading to a violent confrontation.
We were young in the game, as far as in the music industry. So you had people that were potentially be a target. So you give hints like, you know, yo, homie, you gotta watch out for certain people.
During the ambush, Tupac was hit with several bullets, with shots piercing his head, hand, and thigh. And despite how injured he was, he managed to crawl to this elevator to reach the recording studio floor in search of help. I remember Tupac getting shot. I immediately went to the fear that he might have been killed. Tupac was rushed to the hospital where he underwent surgery for his injuries, and the shooting made immediate headlines.
Beaten, shot, and robbed of over $40,000 in jewelry, the speculation surrounding the shooting of Tupac Shakur made instant news, forcing the media and police to get answers and gather evidence fast.
Evidence such as bullet casings, surveillance footage, and key witness testimonies were collected by investigators with the hope of identifying the shooters and reconstructing the events of the night.
When word got out, wow, it was crazy. No one claimed they saw or knew anything.
The jail pipeline, like information line, is like, that grapevine is, you will hear it hours after an incident happens. Once that happened and all the stuff that was happening, you know what I mean, dudes came and told me what happened.
So many unanswered questions to begin this investigation.
And while Tupac grappled to make sense of the senseless act of violence and threat to his life, Tupac's paranoia set in a major way.
For Tupac, Quad Studios wasn't an isolated incident. It was one in a long string of run-ins.
Many were hoping that as he kept rising, some of the bad influences in his life would fall off.
He was adamant that somebody set him up. He felt like it was possibly somebody that was there.
At one point, Tupac stated he believed the sexual assault case was connected to his robbery at Quad Studios, accusing the victim of setting him up.
With medics and doctors tending to 23-year-old Tupac Shakur's multiple gunshot wounds, investigators on the scene scrambled to put together a solid case.
Investigators really had their work cut out for them. No one was talking. No one was saying a word. And there was no evidence from the scene that led to anything.
Even the police spokesperson said Tupac alleged that it was a robbery, but they didn't rule it out. The theories varied from a botched robbery to a deliberate attack planned by someone from the East Coast.
Investigations of this magnitude are really hard to keep under control.
The media coverage sensationalized the shooting, depicting it as a significant event in the East Coast-West Coast beef. People thought this would be a quick open and shut case, but as time went on, they realized that they were wrong.
As night turned to day, words of people behind the infamous shooting of Tupac Shakur turned to worry about the state of hip-hop and the fate of one of music's own.
I remember back then, everybody was praying for Tupac. Everybody wanted him to make it.
The hip-hop community was shaken by the shooting. Many performers showed their support for Pac, while others speculated about the motives and the potential involvement of rival artists.
Pac thought he was betrayed by everybody around him. He was adamant that somebody set him up.
It's a lot of things dudes found out about while incarcerated about what was happening on the streets. And dudes came and told me specifically because of my relationship with Big.
On December 1st, 1994, one day after having been shot 5 times at Quad Studios in New York, Tupac Shakur checked himself out of Bellevue Memorial Hospital to await his fate on the pending sexual assault charge by 19-year-old Ayanna Jackson. Going against his doctor's orders, Tupac was determined to clear his name by showing up to court, gunshot wounds, wheelchair, and all. Additionally, 23-year-old Shakur believed that there was a connection to the attack on his life during the botched robbery at Quad Studios to that of the case against him involving Miss Jackson. Not to mention his thinking that a resolve with one could essentially help police close the case on the other.
The storm had started already.
Tupac was arrested and charged with sexual assault. Legal case after case was mounting, leading up to that night at Quad Studios. The odds were stacked against him. Tupac had been arrested 3 times, convicted twice, and now awaited trial for sexual assault.
Tupac had complicated relationships with those that he accused, including friendship, competition, financial disputes, and betrayal.
Without the incident in the hotel with the young lady, I don't think that would have ever transpired.
Tupac needed someone he could trust, but that was very hard for him to find.
A day after the shooting, Pac was convicted and sentenced to 4.5 years.
With a guilty verdict rendered on the sexual assault charges against Ayanna Jackson and an open investigation on the robbery and attempted hit on his life, Tupac knew that if the police couldn't deliver justice to the crime against him while fighting to overturn the sexual assault conviction on appeal, he'd take matters into his own hands on behalf of the friends turned foes he believed tried to take him out.
Vince Velasquez, David Quinn.
This is totally crazy.
Taking you inside some of the worst crimes with the detectives who solved them.
This was not.
Mostly negative interactions with law enforcement in the past, police weren't giving his case the attention it needed or actually deserved.
His bold accusations and confrontational style heightened tensions within the community.
Tupac was arrested for allegedly shooting a police officer. The police officer didn't identify himself. So, this was a big deal at the time. This wasn't his first run-in with the law.
Given his history and continual run-ins with police, speculation ran wild with whether the cops even cared about the robbery and shooting, or about the growing conspiracy theories surrounding the men responsible for gunning down Tupac Shakur. In addition to concerns from the community about the law enforcement's willingness to help Tupac, the police were equally concerned about the community and eyewitnesses not cooperating with their investigation.
So anytime there is a shooting between 2 different factions, there's that street code.
They expecting somebody to point somebody out, and that's it. And that's the end of their investigation.
The police have been trying their best to get a statement out of him, get a statement from anyone.
It's hard to broach a case like this from a legal standpoint when no one is talking, not even the victim.
With cooperation from the cops and the community grounded, law enforcement knew that the possibility of successfully gathering enough evidence to build a case was next to impossible.
There was no evidence from the scene that led to anything. No leads, no tips, nothing.
Well, to be honest, police ain't doing all that brushing fingerprints and all that. They not doing that. Number one, because it's us. It's some black people getting shot, so they not really, they expecting somebody to point somebody out.
There was some allegations that some East Coast labels and artists had something to do with the shooting at Quad.
The rivalry created tension, with artists feeling pressure to take sides, potentially influencing the motives behind Tupac's attack.
The police were somewhat tired of the back and forth and wanted real evidence. But no one wanted to hear that. Without any substantial leads, the investigation comes to a halt.
Approximately 1 month after the infamous shooting at Quad Studios, investigators still had no leads or any significant breaks in the case, causing the investigation to come to a complete halt. And with Shakur behind bars awaiting an appeal, The
enforcement had a more empathetic, a desire to really get a better understanding of what was happening. Things could have gone differently, but the situation was so charged that it would have continued to spiral whether or not law enforcement got involved.
And for the case to go so...
An award-winning artist behind bars and an investigation gone cold, Death Row Records founder Marion Suge Knight decided to put his money where his mouth was. In exchange for help, Tupac was obligated to release 3 albums for the label, which to some was an expensive price to pay for his freedom, but to Shakur, it was a small cost for the plans he had to take the reins of his career, clear his name, and seek the revenge and justice he felt he was due.
East Coast and West Coast rap, it was heading towards a collision that the industry wasn't prepared for.
The Quad Studio shooting was more than just a violent ambush. It was the spark that ignited the infamous East Coast-West Coast beef, changing the landscape of hip-hop forever.
To be shot 5 times and
Less than a year after the shooting at Quad Studios, and days after the rapper was released on a $1.4 million bail, the poetic justice actor and rapper set the streets ablaze with both victory career-wise and venom lyrically and music-wise with the release of his newest diss track, Hit 'Em Up.
So 3 months after the Quad Studio shooting, Biggie dropped his single, Who Shot Ya? And then it was like everything escalated from there.
Biggie coming out with Who Shot Ya while Tupac was locked up infuriated Pac, in turn sparking the motivation for Tupac's retaliation track, Hit 'Em Up, which by design was not only intended to strike below the belt, but annihilate Biggie, the East Coast, and any other competition.
He came out with that song, Hit 'Em Up, and it was like, I don't think I had words for it at the time. It was like he just put his whole heart and soul, everything he was feeling, everything he was going through, everyone that he was hating at the time, he put it all in the song.
Understanding who they might have had beef with, understanding kind of all angles of a shooting would be extremely helpful to law enforcement in piecing a case together. Otherwise, they're kind of just flying blind based on their assumptions and what they've seen in the media. Media speculation added pressure on law enforcement and heightened public interest. It also led to the spread of misinformation, further complicating the investigation and influencing public opinion.
To be shot 5 times and nobody has any answers, and the police have been trying their best to get a statement out of him, get a statement from anyone. And he put it all in the song. The statement was made.
I do feel like after the shooting, his music got a bit more angry, violent. So I think he used his music as a weapon in a lot of ways. It was his sword.
Pac dropped Hit 'Em Up, Biggie drops Who Shot Ya, and now the whole world is divided.
I was home when he did Hit 'Em Up. I would be more upset than Big. But he was like, yo, that's my bro. You know what I'm saying? He's doing it. I let him do what he's doing. He's getting his money. You know, he felt the way. I don't think it was as much anger as it was hurt.
His lyrics reflected his feelings of betrayal, anger, and the need for vengeance.
If he'd take some losses dealing with people he thought was for him, then of course, you know, you start getting paranoid and start thinking everybody's against you.
After leading a scorched earth campaign against his East Coast rivals on the heels of what he and many of his friends, family, and fans believed was a failed investigation from police regarding the Quad Studio shooting on November 30th, 1994, Tupac Shakur's legal woes continued as he faced a plethora of new street troubles after accepting bail from music mogul and CEO Suge Knight and signing to the notorious Death Row Records. After releasing Hit 'Em Up, his volatile attitude, lyrics, and music seemingly influenced the direction and ultimate closing of the Quad Studios investigation.
When the case is dying a slow death, meaning no leads, no one is coming forward, or they're throwing random names out there, it does not help the investigation.
Pac got his music out, he made his statement, the opinions was running rampant everywhere, but We still in the dark.
And while some viewed him as a victim seeking justice, others saw him as embroiled in endless controversy.
In the court of law, the consensus was to find out who did this to him.
As the investigation came to a close and Tupac navigated back to the West Coast to fulfill his new obligation and contract to death row, those close to the brilliant but troubled rapper expressed his frustration over the lack of attention, service, and justice his case received. By early 1996, not only was Tupac expressing his outrage, frustration, and disappointment in his music, he also became viscerally expressive to, with, and in the media.
I thank you from the bottom of my heart for just destroying everything I worked for the past 22 years, and a happy new year to you too. You did your job. I'm out of money. I'm out of all my resources. You made me look like the bad guy in my own community, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The legal proceedings brought significant media attention, which both damaged and bolstered Tupac's image.
It had a negative impact because he wasn't able to do a lot more things that I think he probably wanted to do in his career. So it kind of tarnished his reputation as dealing especially with acting, and probably got excluded from projects that he wanted to be on.
By the summer of '96, the hip-hop community was seemingly torn apart by the East Coast-West Coast war on wax and words with artists from every coast feuding, all allegedly stemming from Tupac's 1994 unresolved Quad Studio shooting case.
At that time, there was just so much attention, so much charge, particularly in the media surrounding this so-called beef, that it kind of spurred a course of action that might not have occurred had that story not been so prominent in the media.
I can imagine he felt frustrated, so he did what he thought was best. He went where he seemed wanted.
The legal battles influenced Tupac's decisions to align more closely with the West Coast figures like Suge Knight and Death Row Records.
As the East Coast-West Coast beef heightened with every passing month, artists ranging from entertainment to sports to music were greatly affected by what had happened and what was happening to Tupac Shakur. Despite his efforts and accolades through his television, film, production, activism, and his first love of making music, the shooting at Quad Studios and the police's inability to catch or capture those responsible for the case left a stain on the legacy of both Tupac and history of hip-hop. And with the levels of violence and disrespect escalating from coast to coast, on September 7th, 1996, after attending the Mike Tyson fight, friends, fans, and the world would soon learn the devastating repercussions of division.
Vince Velasquez, David Quinn.
This is totally crazy.
Taking you inside some of the worst crimes with the detectives who solve them.
November 30th, 1994. Hip-hop superstar Tupac Shakur entered the famed Manhattan-based Quad Studios, where he was expected to record new music with friends. Yet before Tupac and his crew could even make it upstairs, they were ambushed, robbed of over $40,000 in jewelry, and Shakur shot over 5 times. That marked the beginning of a global beef and the untimely end of 2 of hip-hop's giants.
It was so much going on at that time. It was so much behind the Quad Studio shootings. And we basically didn't know what the truth was.
With the police investigation closing after only 6 months due to a lack of evidence, on September 7th, 1996, the beef and bond between the one-time friends/brothers came to a forever halt. A mere 21 months after the Quad Studio shooting, Tupac Shakur was gunned down at an intersection in Las Vegas following an altercation at the MGM Hotel a few minutes prior. Sources close to the rapper immediately revealed Tupac's shooting was directly connected to and resembled that of the shooting at Quad Studios.
The bullets tore through his head, hand, and thigh. In a desperate bid for survival, Pac fought to stay conscious, bleeding and in agony.
Shakur was admitted to the hospital where he suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the chest, hands, and thigh. And after clinging to life once again, friends, family, and fans of the artist wondered if luck in the city of sin could strike twice, allowing the Machiavelli rapper to survive the same miraculous fate for a second time.
So once he got out west, He got more volatile and he got wilder, and who was gonna stop him? Like, nobody could stop him at that point.
It hardened Tupac to a degree that he had not yet reached. Tupac's trust was shattered. Paranoia and suspicion took root as he accused those who he once called his friends of planning the attack.
The betrayal that he thought was around him on the East Coast, but he was in the West Coast now, and he had to watch his back out there.
6 days after the second ambush and deadly shooting attempt on the life of the now 25-year-old rapper, Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead from the gunshot wounds he sustained from the attack. The continued rumors stemming from the ignited East and West Coast beefs ran rampant, and with the new reports of Tupac's murder sitting at the center of the minds of people connected to the streets, police worried that it'd be only a matter of time before further retaliation ensued.
They were talking about Codys and girlfriends and wives. It was all over the place at that point.
The media coverage sensationalized the shooting.
No one was even arrested. Pac's family, I can imagine how they feel that, they didn't get any resolution for this.
As with the Quad Studios investigation, statements, suspects, witnesses, and the community were mum, creating a deja vu environment for law enforcement and a dangerous atmosphere for the music industry.
The incident was a significant moment, but with various theories and suspects, the case remains unsolved to this day, but is still debated.
Within the 6 days that 25-year-old Tupac Shakur fought for his life from gunshot wounds he endured during the drive-by shooting that took place on September 6th, rumors and theories about the assailants responsible swirled, causing a full-fledged feud between gangs on each coast, all out for blood over the murder of one of the West Coast's own. The target, Christopher Wallace, also known as the Notorious B.I.G.
Tupac and Biggie started as friends, but Tupac believed that Biggie had knowledge of the attack.
I found out about the discrepancies that they had through magazines.
I think things would have been so different if people just communicated, if they stopped.
September of '96, one of hip-hop's most prolific figures and a rising actor and artist fought for his life after a drive-by shooting that took place on the Vegas Strip. He was taken to the hospital, where he died 6 days later, on September 13th, 1996. Rumors erupted within the community that the long-standing feud amongst East and West Coast rappers was the catalyst behind Tupac's murder.
There was some allegations that some East Coast labels and artists had something to do with the shooting.
We kind of knew, who was behind it after that, you know what I mean? Pac was just misinformed. Or he thought that people should have done more.
Being from the East Coast and being a lover of Pac and his music, we was just stuck in the middle of all that.
With West Coast legend Tupac Shakur dead, and an East Coast hero at the center of the scandal from the rift between rappers Biggie and Shakur was bound to explode. And unfortunately, on March 9th, 1997, 6 months after the traumatic demise of Tupac, Christopher Wallace, aka the Notorious B.I.G., met an eerily similar fate of Shakur when he was gunned down in a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles, California.
There were no winners after this. Hip-hop and the culture suffered a major loss. Legally, I'm not sure if things would have gotten worse or better between Biggie and Tupac, and regrettably now, the world will never know.
Everyone has their demons, but that doesn't take away from their greatness. Never will.
The deaths of 24-year-old Christopher Wallace, aka the Notorious B.I.G., and 25-year-old Tupac Shakur marked the beginning and the end of a rap beef that ignited when Shakur was attacked, robbed, and shot in the 1994 Quad Studios shooting incident. The incident incited an East and West Coast war, not just fueled with lyrics in a song, but also violence in the streets that claimed the life of two iconic figures in rap music.
I'm quite sure if both of them would have got together, they would have been able to come to, amicable end. Because, both of them had love for each other, even to the end.
I don't necessarily think that any crime is inevitable. It's always a choice. I don't think that it was bound to happen or meant to happen. It kind of spurred a course of action that might not have occurred had that story not been so prominent in the media.
Pac held it and never said, you know, 'cause I'm quite sure he could have said somebody that he recognized. You know what I mean?
You know, some say that we would have been on a different level had this not all taken place. But at the end of the day, it's part of the hip-hop history.
The tragic turn of events romanticized the annals of hip-hop lore. Tupac Shakur's life and legacy are a profound cautionary tale tied to unfounded accusations, bruised and enraged egos that sparked a feud that ultimately changed the trajectory of both East and West Coast rap, as well as hip-hop and music, forever. And despite his checkered past and run-ins with the law, Tupac Shakur had a unique and special gift of advocacy, activism, and influence in music, the arts, politics, and entertainment that left a legacy for the world.
Tupac's influence is evident in music today, with many artists citing him as an inspiration. His themes, his style, and the messages continue to resonate and shape the industry.
After decades since the brutal murder of legendary rapper Tupac Shakur, Las Vegas police, with the help of the community and culture that once was silent, helped to apprehend a man suspected in facilitating Tupac's murder. Former gang leader Dwayne "Keefe D. Davis was arrested and charged with the orchestrating of Tupac's death and awaits a trial that could once and for all put an end to the devastating loss of the rap icon that was Tupac Shakur.
He was so impactful and so loved even to this day because he had a real deep message that kind of got to the core of a lot of issues in the Black community.
Pac's legacy is unmatched, is untouched. I mean, he went through so much trials and tribulations, and look what we got out of him. Hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. And even though he's gone, he will live on forever on the East Coast and on the West.
In Duluth, Georgia, a terrifying crime unfolds.
We had when that Marvin lady just got shot.
She was shot and then dumped out just like garbage.
A persistent detective.
So what do we got here? I'm very stubborn. I feel like every case can be solved.
Must unravel a mysterious murder.
I seen the whole thing go down.
The path to justice.
Do you know anyone who could have done this?
All signs are pointing to an angry ex-lover.
Takes the investigation.
Oh my God. I don't know who he is, but this is the guy who committed the murder.
Down many wrong turns.
Find shell casings?
No.
And dead ends.